Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I'm just so grateful to all of my subscribers, and you're all very special to me. So don't forget to put a comment in the section, because you know what? I love hearing from you, especially when you tell me what you're drinking, or just drop in to say hello, because I love hearing from you. But before we get started, don't forget to get your quintessential drink, whatever it is you love to drink, whether it's Irish coffee, icy cold glass of champagne, appetizer, whatever it is, go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, if you haven't subscribed, don't forget to do so. Click the notification bell, and I always appreciate the thumbs up. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. I was 28 at the time, well, roughly round about that age. I'm not sure exactly, nor do I specifically recall what I was doing driving down a remote country road in the late evening, not far from my family home in Sandpoint, a rural, relaxed, friendly, conservative town, which at one point in time was named America's most beautiful town. As far as I'm concerned, it still is, but then I'm naturally biased, as I have lived in this idyllic part of the world all my life. Rather like a perennial wildflower that bursts into blossom every summer, gracing the same part of the flowery meadow with its bountiful blooms. Equally, I thrive season after season, year after year, living in this warm, welcoming, convivial part of the world. Our illustrious, enchanting, whimsical town is on the northern tip of Idaho, situated on the 43-mile lake, Pend Oreille, surrounded by the Selkirk, Cabinet and Bitterroot mountain ranges. It's a quintessential part of the world, long revered for its stunning ski slopes, bountiful biking trails, marvellous footpaths, and Native American artifacts in Bonner Valley. The summers here are pleasantly warm, dry, partly cloudy, but the winters are invariably freezing, exceedingly overcast. As I was saying, the reason why I was driving down this remote road during the late evening has somehow conveniently escaped me, extinguishing itself from my mind like a rubber erasing an insignificant pencil-written note. It seems to have become obscure in my memory, erroneously vague, if you like. I do remember everything else that happened that night, as vividly, clearly, and concisely as I would recall a bold, bright picture staring me brazenly in the face. Regretfully, my memory over the rest of the evening is staggeringly detailed, indelibly entrenched or seared in my brain, like the purple ink on the yellow fat of a butcher's leg of lamb. It was in the late summer, veering towards early autumn. Slowly but surely the warm days were increasingly overcast, ebbing away progressively as cooler weather was laying down her early foundations to embrace the fleeting autumn, preparing ultimately for the arrival of the soon-to-be firmly established winter. There was a definite bite in the air. It was a gloomy night, made worse by a complete lack of street lights, or for that matter any nearby comforting, reassuring bright lights of people's homes. I was driving my white truck down the long white ribbon of asphalt. The ground on either side of the road was slightly elevated, with a small rocky clearing that sprawled out into a thick area of forest filled with lodgepole pines, spruces, hemlocks, ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees. I remember collecting my thoughts together, ever grateful that I was not out in the elements, for the night itself cast a doleful impression upon me. I could not put a finger on it. Perhaps it was how dark and foreboding everything appeared. I do believe that the constellations that evening had put on a miserable showing, for there was a tiny crescent moon serenaded by scant clusters of silvery stars that were like diamonds clouded by dust particles, well in need of a good clean from the jewellers, as their display was dull, obscure, faint. Perhaps they were shrouded by cloud cover. I could not be certain, for it was not discernible to the naked eye. But indeed, everything was very inconspicuous. I could see the distinctive, sultry silhouettes of the tall, masterful, pyramid-shaped trees towering in the sky like emerald giants. But they didn't look green on this night, for the darkness had stolen their colourful vibrancy, saturating the trees in a murky, formidable, pretentious darkness, more solid and dense than the sky itself. I knew the discussion on the radio about vampires was doing little to calm my rising trepidation, increasing feelings of angst that seemed nonsensical to me. Perhaps in the deep recesses of my soul, I knew on a gut level that this unpleasantly hostile night was a prelude to something quite dreadful that would ultimately leave a lasting impression on my life, like a noxious, nasty smell on a garment that you could never wash away.
But do you, Lisa, really think that Count Dracula was real?
I heard the radio host saying.
Oh, yes, he was definitely real, came a woman's authoritative voice. I've done a lot of research in the matter myself after becoming completely hooked on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Do you know that Prince Charles came from the Dracula bloodline?
The host sounded sceptical.
Really? I haven't heard that before. As for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I positively detested that programme on television. Come on, it was only a bit of fun. So you slay the vampire with a big stake through the heart, is that right? Is that the only way that you can kill them?
That's right. It's the only way. It's a stake through the heart every time.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for your very valuable, interesting input. If you have anything to say on the matter, folks, give us a call on 553961.
I shuddered as I listened to the conversation that finally morphed into drinking human blood. Could the conversation get more depraved than this, I wondered. I trembled in disgust momentarily, taking one of my hands off the wheel to adjust the station to something more light-hearted. That was better, I thought. I could hear the voice of Sheena Easton breaking through the radio waves. What a relief! A stark contrast to the grotesque descriptions of blood-sucking vampires. In that poignant moment, it was almost as if time stood alarmingly still, as if someone held it back in the palm of their hand, suspending it for a moment. I saw a figure running across the road, inches away from my truck. Bloody hell, I thought, trying desperately to brake as I slammed my foot on the pedal as hard as I could. It was too late. I heard the ominous thud, the boom. I felt my car's slight resistance as my rubber tyres bumped, veering over something quite substantial, sizable. I could hear the squashing, crunching, pulverising sounds of flesh and bones. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'd killed someone. No one could survive such a hit. It wasn't even possible. My car ground to a halt, stopping in the middle of the road. I cupped my hands over my mouth, trying to process what had just transpired in those dramatic seconds. I stared into space vacantly as waves of dread descended down my spine, while a nauseating bitter taste engulfed the back of my throat. It was with great reluctance and trepidation I opened my car door, getting out into the road to inspect the dreadful carnage. I peered beneath the undercarriage of my car, and there, lying in the road, was a dead body. I got back into my car, manoeuvring it slightly out of the way, so I could see this grisly sight ever more clearly. It was a man in his 40s or 50s, wearing an anorak hoodie and casual jeans. My tyre had run through the middle of his torso, obliterating the flesh separating the shoulders, head and upper breast from the lower waist, pelvis and legs. My car had glided over his body relatively smoothly, without much of a backlash, other than a few desperate stalls as I tried my damnedest to slam down the brakes. I had squashed him under the heavy weight of my rubber tyre, like a fly under a squatter. I stared in horror, leaning over the man, trying to shake his arm as though to wake him up, but of course he didn't respond. How could he? His eyes were glazed over like a dead fish, staring blankly out into the night. What the hell had I done, I wondered. I was completely mortified. For a long while I was staring in the middle of the road, as though hypnotised by the macabre sight staring back at me. I had killed this man. The reality of this appalling revelation hit me hard like an icy-cold bucket of water thrust over my head. I felt like a murderer. I had deprived this man of the God-given right for him to have life. In a trice I heard these heavy feet pounding the road, moving swiftly towards me at one hell of a speed. I could hear the thump, thump, thump as they neared their approach. I could feel my heart growing heavy with shame, remorse, regret. How I so wished I could turn back the hands of time, undo these last frantic moments. Perhaps if I'd continued listening to that Dracula discussion instead of changing the channel to something lighter, I could have stopped the truck in time. Could this get any worse, I thought? Someone had been eyewitness to this horror. Then I saw her standing there. Her expression was exceedingly grim. Her deep-set dark eyes glanced from me to the dead body, back to me again, as though she was rotating balls in her long feminine hands, rather like a juggler. I could sense she was saying, "What the heck have you done?" This was not a normal woman by any manner of means, but she was unequivocally female, very human-looking. The only difference was she was covered in long, flowing dark hair. The exquisite colour and sheen of a raven's feathers, that was the texture of human hair. It swathed and adorned her lofty athletic body, with the exception of her face and palms, in a luxurious mohair-like coat that gleamed with health, but was less abundant under the arm area, as if the chafing of skin had worn away some of that hair. Never even for a fleeting second did anything about this woman remind me of an ape. She towered at about 7 feet tall, with long, lean, muscular legs, shapely, well-toned, overlong arms, a powerful, well-developed pair of shoulders. I noticed the large torso was extensively wide, especially over the top area of her body, slimming down to a faint suggestion of a waist, but there was not much of one. Her breasts were like empty, sagging pockets that hung down low on her chest, as though completely drained of their contents. Her leathery, heart-shaped face was exceedingly feminine. The skin shone like a glittering new penny, the colour of coal. She had kind, generous, expressive eyes. Her nose was flat, aquatic, her cheekbones high, her lips were slender. In these poignant moments, it was almost as if my reality had swung out of control, like a train that had completely derailed itself. It was almost as if the course of events unfolding before my eyes were not real. They were like a movie or a dream, something that didn't align with what I perceived as normal. The deceased body of the man sliced in half was a victim of my truck, along with the strange anomalies of the hairy woman staring at me. Her indignant, peeved expression did very little to quash the dreadful guilt galloping through my body, like a thunderous herd of bison across the American plains, even though she reminded me of a cave woman who did not speak a word of English. I felt I owed her dutifully an explanation for what I'd done. She looked offended, like a mother waiting to hear her son's excuses for his absurd, atrocious behaviour that warranted some form of justification or appeasement. Her look was identical to my mother's when I was a kid and had stolen something from the larder. Disagreeable, disappointed, beleaguered. "It wasn't my fault," I said, pointing at the body. "He ran out in front of my truck. I could hardly stop in time. Believe me, I tried." The female creature continued to stare at me, as if my words had fallen on deaf ears, as if she couldn't comprehend the enormity of what I'd done. I could feel her extreme disappointment, rather like a knife cutting through me with an ice-cold blade. I stammered uneasily, "I'm going." I quickly ran over to my driver's door, opening it very swiftly, getting into the truck. My focus was to drive home, to tell my wife exactly what I'd done, not to call the police. Well, not yet. I couldn't. I needed to process things first, digest everything, come to terms with this shocking atrocity. I drove down the long dusty driveway, cycling up dirt and the odd random pebble beneath my rubber tyres. Finally I parked under the carport next to our pretty little stone house in the heart of the valley. I ran through to the bedroom. My wife was fast asleep. I began to shake her vigorously. She groaned disapprovingly. "I'm trying to sleep. What's your problem?" She sat up suddenly, looking at me with a dismayed look. She could sense the horror on my face. "I've just killed someone." "You what?" "I've just killed someone." My wife looked mortified. "You killed someone? Who? When? How? Why?" "I ran over a man in the road. My wheels sliced his body in half." "Oh no! Oh no!" My wife looked appalled. You ran over a man! How could you? Why didn't you stop in time? What happened?" "That's the problem. I don't really know. It happened so fast. Just like when people run over a deer in the road. It was like that." "Oh my God! How dreadful!"
said my wife, cradling me in her arms. "It's not your fault. It could have happened to anyone. I'm just so glad you're all right."
"Yes, but sweetheart, the least I can do is to come forward. Admit to the police what happened. If I don't, it makes me a monster. A hit-and-run driver that's failing to take responsibility. I can't stand people like that. I have to man up to this, admit to what I've done. If I don't, and they should find that I'm responsible for running over this man, my lack of cooperation with the law will make me appear the guilty party."
"What about me? What about our children? What if you go to jail for this?"
"Look, sweetheart, it was an accident, not a deliberate act of murder. There is a big difference." So there I was in the office at the police station, fiddling with my fingers nervously, feeling like a guilty criminal about to confess a duplicitous crime. The gravity of what I'd done hung over me like a heavy pair of block-out curtains around a window pane. I watched as the detective inspector pulled up his chair. He had a notepad in his hands. He wasn't a bad-looking man, in his early 40s, 50s or 60s, with a full head of dark hair, swept away neatly from his face. He had a strong masculine jawline, where the skin looked freshly shaved. He was wearing plain clothes, a neat cotton shirt, a smart pair of caramel pants, long pointed boots. He stared at me through his dark brown eyes. "So I gather you claim you've run over someone in the middle of the road. Am I right?" "That's right," I said. I gave the other detective the exact coordinates of where it occurred. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Sure. I was driving down the road in my truck. Then I saw the shadowy figure of a man running out into the road, yards away from my truck like a deer. Sometimes they do that in this part of the world. I couldn't stop in time, detective. I really tried, but it was too late. The damage was already done." "Did you see the dead body?" "Of course I saw it, detective." "Can you describe it to me? What did it look like?" "What do you want me to say, detective? It was gruesome. It was a mess. I ran through his middle. You really don't want to know those graphic details." "Oh, but I do. Can you describe what the man looked like on his face? I imagine you did look at his face, am I right?" "Well, I think he was in his 40s, but I'm never very good with age, detective. He had dark brown, thick hair. No sign of a receding hairline. But there was a maturity to him, so he could have been older. Creases around his hazel eyes. A few crinkle lines on the forehead. I think he was slim-built. Not athletic, though. His skin was exceedingly pale." I watched as the officer wrote down the details, his wrist obscuring the writing. I had visions going through my mind of his writing, "Guilty, guilty, guilty as charged." "Did the front of your car sustain any damage?" "Well, there is some blood and guts on the crowbar, if that's what you're talking about. It's a bit bent, buckled in, but not very bad." "The problem with your claim, mister?" "The name is Paul McIntyre, sir." "As I was saying, Mr. McIntyre, I've just had a call at the station. The police have searched the coordinates you gave them. There is no sign of a dead corpse on the road, as you so claim, nor has there been any recent reports of a missing man fitting your description. It would seem there is a brown patch in the road that has tested positive for blood, but the body is missing, nowhere to be seen, completely vanished." "But I don't understand. I promise you, detective, I ran over that man. He was lying dead in the road. I saw him myself. I even grabbed his arm, hoping to wake him up, but of course he was a goner." "Supposing I believe that what you're saying is true, that you're not confessing to an erroneous hit and run, it would seem that someone has unwittingly removed the body from the road. So if it wasn't you cleaning up after yourself to hide the evidence, then I ask you, who was it? And why would they remove the body?" He asked that, looking at me for any signs of deception on my face. "Of course I wouldn't do that, detective. I promise you I never removed that body. What kind of trouble am I in, detective, for running over a man like this?" "Well, under the circumstances,
You can hardly be charged without a body, can you? Said the detective. But there are all kinds of ramifications. The least would be paying a fine of about $10,000, losing your license, or being charged with criminal negligence, unintentional vehicle manslaughter, or involuntary manslaughter, the latter meaning a prison sentence of about 4 years, depending, of course, on the case, the judge's conclusions, stuff like that. There are lots of variables in every Pacific case.
So what must I do, detective?
Go home. That's the best advice I can give you. We'll be in touch with you shortly. Naturally, we need to impound your truck, see if we can find any DNA on it. But without a body at this stage, there's not much we can do. The case is in limbo. We have had no reports of a missing man either. I walked away from the police station, feeling worse than ever. I had felt that confessing to the accident would make me feel significantly better, but it made me feel 1,000 times worse. How could the body have vanished like that, disappeared into thin air? Then I remembered the hair-covered wild woman. Could she have taken it, I wondered? It was a distinct possibility. I didn't think she would have taken it to eat, but possibly to bury. She had seemed rather distressed by what I had done to the strange man. It was the only thing that would make sense to me. Of course, I couldn't mention her to the detective, as I would sound as if I was off my trolley. My wife had persuaded me not to mention the wild woman, who she was certain was a creature known as a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Don't go telling the detective about her, she warned. They'll think you've lost your marbles. The detective had given me a car to use, while they impounded mine to take some DNA samples, so I decided to return to the accident scene. And sure enough, there was no sign of the body there in the road, only a brown patch. It was almost as if nothing had transpired. It was so bizarre. I decided to search the woods to see if I could see any sign of the body in there. The cell phone in my pocket began to ring, so I pulled it out. "Hello, is that Paul McIntyre?" "Speaking," I said. "It's Detective Conway Richards speaking. We met earlier." "That's right," I said. "Any news, detective?" "Well, there is a boarding house that has reported a German backpacker vanishing. Never returned last night, I gather. He fits the description of the man you ran over. The trouble is there's no wallet, no identification, no passport on him. We have absolutely no clue who he is at the moment. We're checking with the airlines, with the German embassy, to see if we can get any leads." "But why is his passport not with his stuff?" I asked. "You say the man was wearing an anorak. Maybe he took his passport and wallet with him. Maybe they're in his pockets." "I see," I said. "I'll keep you posted," said the detective. "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate that." I climbed up the rocky embankment, walked into the wooded area, not sure what to make of anything that had just transpired. I felt this vacuous hollow in the pit of my stomach, knowing that I'd run down someone's family member. I had dreadful visions of a trail of broken hearts, spilled tears, devastated relatives whose lives were ruined on my account. It made absolutely no sense that the man had run into the road in front of me, leaving me no opportunity to stop. Surely he had seen me. This case was rarely curious, to say the least. As I walked through the serene ponderosa pine trees that towered into the sky like graceful giants, I scanned the forest floor for any sign of a body, but I saw absolutely nothing. Everything was so peaceful, blissfully tranquil, radiantly beautiful. It was easy to forget the horrors of the previous night. I could smell the fragrant, sweet butterscotch-like scent of the trees. The forest floor was soft, marshy beneath my feet, dotted with pretty ferns and pretty ground covers. I could hear the enchanting bird song. Then the phone rang again. "It's Detective Conway again." "Hello, detective. We found the passport. Very interesting developments, you'll be pleased to know. Interesting case. Very interesting." "So who is he, detective, then?" "His name is Hans Friedrich. He's 45 years old." "Sounds German," I said. "Yes, he is. Well, this Hans Friedrich informed his girlfriend he was going to America. He told her he was never coming back. She couldn't understand what he was saying, as he hasn't got a green card, so how can he live here? I gather he'd suffered from serious depression for a very long time. Last year he tried to throw himself in front of a bus in Frankfurt, but luckily the driver stopped in time. You mean, Detective, that he ran in front of my truck deliberately? Is that what you're saying? The girlfriend appears to think so. She thinks he took a trip to America to end it all for himself. She said the way he was behaving was not normal. He's not been normal for a very long time, according to her. Then, of course, I spoke to the owner of the boarding house. Now, she says the man was exceedingly weird, asking all kinds of curious questions about country roads with little traffic passing through. She said he seemed very dark and depressed, found hundreds of beer cans strewn around his room. Not a good sign, possibly a bit of Dutch courage required to do what he did, I imagine. Couldn't he have committed suicide on his own home turf, Detective, rather than coming all the way to America? Isn't that overkill? Maybe he wanted to do it away from his loved ones to avoid causing them too much distress, especially after the bus accident. But there is the question of the body. Where the heck is it? I don't know, Detective. I've no idea. Well, there is some good news for you. If this is a suicide, you're off the hook. No charges will be brought against you. It's looking exceedingly good for you. Keep your fingers crossed. I will. Thanks, Detective, for phoning. After the phone call, I was flooded with waves of relief, knowing that there was a strong chance the man had run out deliberately in front of my car. It was very strange that he had selected a remote country road in Idaho to finish himself off. Why not an all-consuming interstate where you would be guaranteed to be mowed down? I phoned up my wife to reveal to her the latest findings from the police. I spoke to Detective Conway, I told her. He reckons the man we believe I ran over came here to America to end his own life. Is that not very strange? Very, said my wife. What I don't get is why he would choose a remote country road here in Idaho to end it all, not a busy interstate. Oh, I think I understand, said my wife. I mean, a dirty country road is quite peaceful, isn't it? Away from prying eyes, crowds of people, witnesses. Also, he could take his time, decide when he was going to run out into the road to end it all. If you're standing on a busy interstate, the pressures on you are going to get immense. I mean, how long do you want to stand there in the roaring traffic? Maybe he wanted to do things in his own time, without an audience. I suppose you have a point there. Still, what would make a man so distressed he'd kill himself? I don't know, said my wife. It's desperately sad. People kill themselves for all kinds of tragic reasons. Switching off my cell phone, I noticed a discernible movement in the branches. Leaves twitched, swayed, were pushed aside like a curtain of shrubbery. Then I saw her, a tall, shadowy silhouette, revealing herself, making her prominent presence known to me. She unhesitantly glided through the pines with incredible grace, poise, elegance, beelining towards me. To my astonishment, it was no other than the elusive, mysterious female wild woman that I had seen the previous night. It was clear she recognized me immediately. The wild woman's raven-colour hair gleamed, twinkled in the sunlight. As strange as this might sound, I thought she looked quite magnificent, lofty, majestic, imposing. She looked at me directly in the eyes. We had a moment together, like a meeting between two souls, an intimate connection that I will always treasure as long as I live. I felt a bonding with her that perhaps only two people can share who have both witnessed a devastating event together. Her brown eyes had lost their condemning look. To date, they are quite literally the most exquisite eyes I have ever seen. Who knew that eyes the colour of the darkest treacle could be so incredibly mesmerising? She pointed to the road with her overlong arms, looking at me directly in the eyes, as if to say she remembered what had happened. She pointed to herself, to the ground beneath us, making a digging movement with her hands, as if to say she'd buried the man. In my mind, I thought she was saying, I need not worry. I never ever saw her again, but I do remember her fondly, as someone who touched my life so dramatically, in a matter of seconds. All these years later, I look on that event with much sadness, as I feel so much compassion for Hans Friedrich. Regretfully, his body was never discovered, or ever found,
but the family believed he'd come to America to take his own life. The manner in which he took his life leaves more questions than answers, but at least I can live with myself knowing that this man intentionally chose to take his life. Why he chose that remote piece of road, I will never know. Fortunately, I was never charged with the incident. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.